I am Mr. Obsidian. Prepare yourself for the Man of Black.
The following program is rated PG and contains scenes that may not be appropriate for younger viewers. Your discretion is advised.
Many celebrities have reacted to the news of the Epstein list being released. First up was The Rock, who said, "I'm absolutely disgusted to read all of this. Nothing can be done to repair all the damage that has been done, but I hope the victims get justice and anyone who is an abuser rots away in jail." Next was Travis Kelce, who said, "Pure filth. I pray for justice, and I hope they truly get what they deserve for the disgusting things they've done and are not granted help due to their influence and wealth." Next, Will Smith said, "How could these complete animals do this? And they thought they could get away with that." Next up was Britney Spears, who said, "All these crazy people make me sick." Up next is Johnny Depp, who said, "I just hope justice is brought to everyone who deserves it." Next, Oprah commented underneath a quote on Instagram on the same day as the Epstein list was released. The quote said, "Justice will prevail." Oprah commented underneath this saying, "It always does." Next, Cardi B said, "I keep telling everyone, Hollywood a messed up place and people are truly disgusting." Next was Donald Trump, who said, "Didn't I warn everyone about fake news?" Trump's comment is in reference to it being revealed that he never went to Epstein's island or had any doings with him, despite many people accusing him of that over the years. And finally, supermodel Naomi Campbell previously gave a statement where she spoke about getting accusations of being tied to Jeffrey Epstein and bared all in her comments.
This is a direct character assassination. I've always said that I'm not a saint, that I am a work in progress, but I will not be held hostage by my past. What he's done is indefensible. And when I heard of what he'd done, it sickened me to my stomach, just like everybody else. Because I've had my fair share of sexual predators, and thank God that I had good people around me that protected me from this. I mean, right now I stand with the victims. I can't, they're scarred for life. For life. I've rubbed shoulders with hundreds of thousands of people. The frightening conclusion here is that if the negative action of your neighbor, colleague, or even an associate can somehow make you guilty too, simply by association, then we indeed live in very worrying times. This affects us all. It is wrong, it's unfair, and it must be stopped.
This story.
We've obtained a new Jeffrey Epstein address book. One that no one has ever seen before.
Jeffrey Epstein got away with what he got away with because of who was in his address book.
What's interesting for us about this book is a new cast of characters who we didn't previously know had interactions with or did business with them.
Our first thought was to just do whatever we could to verify that it was real. We've obtained a copy of an address book that we believe belonged to Jeffrey Epstein, and your name and contact information are listed in the book.
I'm a reporter for Insider. I'm just calling everybody who's in this address book who has not previously been publicly associated with Jeffrey Epstein.
We need to make sure it was a real artifact that really represented something about Jeffrey Epstein and his connections to people.
The story is not one that sounds exactly believable. Someone dropped Jeffrey Epstein's address book in the 90s and now belongs to some guy who lives on a farm in Vermont.
I'm very careful not to put my fingerprints on the book, not to put any sort of DNA or hair or anything like that. My name is Christopher Halali. Where should I look? I currently live on my wife's farm. As a student of national security issues, imperialism, I was fascinated by the Jeffrey Epstein case. There are names that are highlighted, and I think one of the most notable highlighted names is former President Donald Trump.
My name is Denise Ondeko. Ta-da! And I believe I found the book sometime in the 90s. Walking along Fifth Avenue, and I just noticed a small black book on the sidewalk.
So you're pretty sure that it was somewhere between 54?
Yes, it could have been here or there.
We have spoken extensively with Denise, and we found her story to be credible.
I saw the book, picked it up, glanced through it. Damn. It was filled with names like Kennedy, Rockefeller, Trump, etc. And it was like, whoa, this is bizarre. So I kept it for the New York City artifact that it was.
Did you know who Jeffrey Epstein was at the time?
No. When I rediscovered the book last year, it was like, holy it's Jeffrey Epstein.
A Manhattan billionaire arrested yesterday on federal sex trafficking charges.
Accusations from indecent exposure to inappropriate touching to rape.
I went to tips at New York Times. I sent something to Rachel Maddow. I just figured nobody was interested. Come the end of November, I really needed brakes for my car and I didn't have enough money. And I thought, what the hell? You know, you, Jeffrey Epstein, you paid for my brakes. So I put it on eBay.
It was right there for everybody to see. Most people would think it's a fake or a forgery. I took the risk. When I received the book in the mail, my heart was nearly jumping out of my chest. You know, I felt like Indiana Jones. It's a dark book. It's a book that I think has a lot of suffering behind it, a lot of pain, a lot of evil, some would say. I felt that it was important for people to see who Epstein knew and what sort of network of power was behind him. Right now I'm packaging the book for forensic analysis and handing it off to a team of journalists. If it comes back and it's not authentic, it's a pretty awesome forgery, I have to say.
One of the moments in the public waking up to the magnitude of his crimes was the publication in 2015 of an address book belonging to Jeffrey Epstein. And what was stunning about it was it contained the names of Donald Trump and Mick Jagger, Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton. And it sort of woke people up to the fact that this was a guy who had access to the halls of power.
Our reporting also found about 220 new names that didn't appear in this other address book.
If someone were to concoct a fake book to trick journalists, they would start by taking those names from the other public little black book and putting them in this one. So we start by sort of correlating the names, and then we just started calling people in the book. whose names have not been previously associated with Jeffrey Epstein.
Hello?
Hi, I'm trying to reach Elena Kayen.
This is she?
Hi, I'm calling for Suzanne Urcha. Would you be able to connect me with her?
For who?
I'm trying to reach Joan Severance.
We don't currently represent Joan. The number you dialed is not in service.
I'm trying to reach Michael Cutlip.
This is he?
Elena Barmakova,
Who's calling?
I'm working on a story about an address book.
that we believe belonged to Jeffrey Epstein.
Do you mind if I'm recording this call?
I do mind.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Yeah, I haven't seen or spoken to Jeffrey since the late 90s.
For them to say, yes, I knew him in the 90s, gives credence to the idea that the book is real.
It's not the case that everybody who was in his address book was an enabler of Jeffrey Epstein. It's more adding to the body of knowledge to keep chipping away at the mystery.
She was not interested in speaking.
These are some of the prominent names we reached out to. None of them had ever been publicly associated with Epstein before.
Suzanne Urcha, Melania Trump's best friend. She later married Woody Johnson, who now owns the New York Jets.
Carl Icahn, special advisor to Donald Trump during his presidency.
Christina Grieven, the wife of Christopher Cuomo.
Jill Harth accused Donald Trump of sexual assault.
Stephen Ratner led Barack Obama's efforts to resuscitate Detroit.
Marty Peretz, longtime mentor to former Vice President Al Gore. Les Gelb was a legendary New York Times columnist. Sandy Warner was the chairman and CEO of JP Morgan until 2000. Billionaire John Katzimatidis, who told us that he offered Epstein a ride and Epstein sent him a 3-foot bottle of champagne and thanks. And this just goes to show that in the 1990s, he was sort of cultivating a much larger orbit that we can see evidence later on.
How you doing?
Good, how are you?
We also engaged the services of a forensic examiner who's familiar with authenticating documents.
I was cautious because I didn't want to cross over into an area that the FBI was investigating. My name is Dennis Ryan, and I'm a forensic document examiner. I'm confident that the book is probably circa 1995 to 2000. One of the factors was the Gestetner imprint that's on the Velo bind. Their organization was certainly out of production by 1998 to 2000. It would be very difficult to make up a book with that imprint. The most important thing is the change in the area code.
So here's Donald Trump's entry in the 1990s address book. You can see that his Palm Beach phone numbers feature a 407 area code. Now, if we look at Trump's entry in the address book from the early 2000s, you can see that he has the same phone numbers listed for Palm Beach, but with a different area code, 561, and that area code was introduced in 1996. Jeffrey Epstein is still such a mystery. Over a year after he's died.
Accused sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein is dead.
Jeffrey Epstein's attorneys questioning whether his death was a suicide.
I think my biggest takeaway is that Epstein had an extremely large sphere of influence, and we're not even sure about the true extent of it.
I think this book elaborates on that in a different era, a different time, and with some different people that we didn't know were a part of that circle that eventually became a part of the reason that Jeffrey Epstein could get away with raping and abusing women and girls. And I think it's important to keep in mind how power is able to avoid accountability. And the more we can remember what Epstein's actions represent, the more we can prevent people from escaping accountability now and in the future.
What a weird turn of events, how serendipitous the whole thing has played out. Unbelievable. I just remember having that thought, should I keep this? If it was a heavy something or other, I probably would have tossed it.
I think it's an interesting story, you know. One book with the FBI, one book on the farm. It's fascinating.
So to be clear, you're not concerned about anything that could come out about you and Jeffrey Epstein?
My plane rides with Jeffrey Epstein, I took 2 plane rides with him. Once in 1993, when I went down to visit my mother in Palm Beach. Remember, nobody knew about anything about Jeffrey Epstein's nefarious activities until 2006. He was a public figure and a big philanthropist. My wife knew his girlfriend, Glenn Maxwell, and they offered us a ride when we were going down to see my mother. I was with 2 children and my wife out on the plane at that time. I knew nothing about Jeffrey Epstein. And then I think 1 or 2 years later, we took my kids fossil hunting on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. And those are, that was the extent of anything that I had to do with Jeffrey Epstein's airplane. Of course, I ran across Jeffrey Epstein at parties, at fundraisers, the Robin Hood fundraiser in New York. But other than that, I had no relationship with him.
So nothing that could come out that you're concerned about in terms of the campaign or anything like that?
Nothing at all. I hope everything that is known about Jeffrey Epstein comes out.
Jeffrey Epstein's contact list boasted some big names in Hollywood. Alec Baldwin, Mick Jagger, and Michael Jackson, just some of the high-profile people uncovered in newly released documents from the Justice Department.
Breaking news right now, you're going to see some Epstein information being released by my office.
Attorney General Pam Bondi on Fox News Wednesday, ahead of the Trump administration's info dump to conservative influencers this week, which some pundits have dubbed a PR stunt or distraction tactic. The discovery of A-list names, which also includes Naomi Campbell, Ralph Fiennes, and Courtney Love, does not indicate any firm connection to the money manager, nor the sex trafficking convictions he was about to serve time for in 2019 before dying by suicide in his jail cell.
I was not a fan of his, that I can tell you. I was not a fan of his.
That's Trump in his first term, hitting back at headlines surrounding his relationship with Epstein. Also among the names inside the so-called client list, the president's ex-wife Ivana Trump and their daughter Ivanka.
The people in Palm Beach knew him. He was a fixture in Palm Beach. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan.
So far, multiple reports say the new details are actually old news, but Bondi's also calling the move Phase 1.
200 victims, 200. So we have well over 250 actually. It's pretty sick what that man did.
First batch of Epstein files have been released by the Department of Justice, and we have just quickly reviewed them. We're going to let you know what is revealed, what isn't, where this can go from here. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. What a day. What a day. As you can tell, this is kind of an emergency sidebar. I'm not on set. We didn't know when this was going to happen. We were waiting all day for the release of these Jeffrey Epstein files, and they are out here. Now, to be clear, this is potentially only a fraction of what could come out. And we're going to go over this for you so you don't have to do it yourself. And a little fair warning here, little fair warning. It doesn't appear from our initial review that there's anything bombshell or revolutionary or here's the Epstein list of everybody who was involved in this potential wrongdoing. I want to be clear about that. But there's a reason for that, because it was expected, after litigation and FOIA requests and the trial of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's accomplice, who was convicted of federal sex crimes charges and was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a lot of this material has already come out. Flight logs, manifests, address book. However, it is fascinating to see what was released here. And of course, Jeffrey Epstein was the disgraced financier, convicted sex offender, who ended up dying in prison while awaiting trial on federal sex trafficking charges. But the first thing we got to talk about is the statement that was released by the Department of Justice when they released all these files. And it reads, today, Attorney General Pamela Bondi, in conjunction with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, declassified and publicly released files related to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein and his sexual exploitation of over 250 underage girls at his homes in New York and Florida, among other locations. The first phase of declassified files largely contains documents that have been previously leaked but never released in a formal capacity by the U.S. government. Quote, this Department of Justice is following through on President Trump's commitment to transparency and lifting the veil on the disgusting actions of Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators, said Attorney General Pamela Bondi. The first phase of files released today sheds light on Epstein's extensive network and begins to provide the public with long overdue accountability. The FBI is entering a new era, one that will be defined by integrity, accountability, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. This is from FBI Director Kash Patel, the new FBI Director. There will be no cover-ups, no missing documents, and no stone left unturned, and anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. If there are gaps, we will find them. If records have been hidden, we will uncover them, and we will bring everything we find to the DOJ to be fully assessed and transparently disseminated to the American people as it should be. The oath we take is to the Constitution, and under my leadership, the promise will be upheld without compromise. It goes on to say, Attorney General Bondi requested the full and complete files related to Jeffrey Epstein. In response, the department received approximately 200 pages of documents. However, the Attorney General was later informed of thousands of pages of documents related to the investigation and indictment of Epstein that were not previously disclosed. The Attorney General has requested the FBI deliver the remaining documents to the department by 8 a.m. on February 28th and has tasked FBI Director Kash Patel with investigating why the request for all documents was not followed. The department remains committed to transparency and intends to release the remaining documents upon review and redaction to protect the identities of Epstein's victims. By the way, in a separate letter from Pamela Bondi to Kash Patel, she said she expects a report from him in basically 2 weeks about why the files weren't turned over. Hey, by the way, we really, really appreciate you guys coming to us for this episode of Sidebars. We break down, this new development in the Jeffrey Epstein case. And for that, I gotta thank our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, because with their support, it helps make episodes like this possible. Now, Morgan & Morgan, a firm with over 1,000 attorneys, do you know why? They win a lot. In the past few months, Morgan & Morgan secured a $29 million verdict for a bicyclist in Philadelphia, a $2.7 million verdict for a car accident victim in Florida, not to mention $5.6 million for a car crash victim in Georgia after insurance offered that client $0. And even if you think your case isn't worth millions and millions of dollars, why not start a claim and fight for what you deserve? And by the way, Morgan & Morgan makes it so simple. You can start a claim from your phone in just 8 clicks. So if you're injured, you can easily start a claim at forthepeople.com/LC-Sidebar. This is very significant, and we actually dedicated a whole other sidebar, we released it earlier today, to this very issue. But the idea that the FBI is not complying with a request from the Attorney General who oversees the DOJ and the FBI, very concerning. Now, we don't know for sure who Attorney General Pam Bondi's source is, whether that person is credible, what exactly happened here, if there was maybe a miscommunication or maybe even a deliberate attempt to not turn over the materials. But I encourage everybody to check out that other episode where I interviewed former FBI agent Colin Schmidt. You can hear his take on this, but we will see what comes of that in the meantime. And we'll see what happens tomorrow, maybe in 2 weeks with the report. But now we want to get into the documents. Okay, so first up, the flight log released as part of Phase 1 has a note at the top, and it says it was a government exhibit publicly released in U.S. v. Maxwell, Ghislaine Maxwell's criminal case. And to kind of give you an idea of just how much time Epstein and others spent on his jet, it's been referred to as the Lolita Express, the flight log is 118 pages long and only covers April 1991 to January 2006. Now, a lot of this information, as I mentioned, we've heard before, but I want to give you a few of the highlights here. So parts of this flight log are very, very difficult to read, so whether through the handwriting or the age of the photocopies, but at times, whoever's filling out the sheet also uses initials or just writes down one male or two female, so it's kind of difficult to know at times who was on the plane. Now, sometimes the description on the flight log included notes. For example, in June 1991, an entry appears to say, Herb, show plane to Reba McEntire plus husband. Okay, so that's a big name right there. You got another entry from January the next year that indicated that Epstein and Maxwell flew into Burbank to attend the Academy Awards. But look, it's safe to say that a lot of people flew on the so-called Lolita Express. The two on it the most were Jeffrey Epstein, of course, and Ghislaine Maxwell. But there were other famous names as well. President Donald Trump's name appears several times in the early 90s. A May 1994 log entry says Jeffrey flew with Trump, Trump's then-wife Marla Maples, their daughter Tiffany, and Tiffany's nanny. Another time in 1995, Eric Trump was listed as a passenger. Prince Andrew's name appears in an entry from February 1999. The prince has previously gotten in a lot of hot water over his connection, his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, which continued even after Epstein was convicted of sex crimes. That always seemed to be the allegation. Former President Bill Clinton also makes several appearances in the early 2000s on the flight log. He flew multiple times in 2002, accompanied by multiple Secret Service agents each time. You have an entry from August 2002 that lists Virginia Roberts, now called Virginia Giuffre, a victim of Epstein and Maxwell, who pushed forward with a lawsuit against the apparent madam, leading to, by the way, all these documents, or a lot of these documents, being released during Maxwell's eventual criminal trial. But another exhibit included in phase 1 of the document release may not look like much at first glance. It's fully redacted, but this list is entitled Masseuses, and with a note saying redacted to protect potential victim information, it has 254 line items. So while it's unclear whether any of the names might be repeated, it is a staggering number of women and girls who may have been subjected to sexual assault, because we all remember what the allegations were, that Jeffrey Epstein, through Ghislaine Maxwell, would bring young women over, young girls over, and under the guise of massage, would sexually assault them and abuse them. Next up, we got to talk about the contact book. So at the top of this 95-page document, it says redactions for personal contact information. And let me tell you, there are a lot of redactions in this, okay? It is basically a bunch of names with their personal information either blacked out or redacted. Maybe their phone numbers or addresses. I'm assuming that's what it is, but some boxes are bigger than others, so maybe there was more information about certain people rather than others. However, there are a list of names that are quite notable on this list, okay? Now, before I read up a bunch of them, remember, just because they are presumably in Jeffrey Epstein's contact book doesn't mean they're complicit in any of his alleged wrongdoing. Epstein was a very well-known and well-connected financier who knew a lot of people. Got to make that clear, okay? So even though I'm about to list a lot of people, this is not the Epstein list of everybody who was involved in alleged wrongdoing or illegal activity, okay? Now, to give you a sense of who he seemingly knew, here we go. Alec Baldwin, Ralph Fiennes, Michael Jackson, Dr. Henry A. Kissinger, Mick Jagger, David Koch, Chris Tucker, Richard Branson, Barbara Walters, Mike Wallace, Steve Wynn, Alan Dershowitz, Donald Trump, Ivanka Trump, Ivana Trump, Les Wexner, Courtney Love, Rupert Murdoch, Duchess of York, Joan Rivers, Christy Turlington, Maria Shriver, Ron Silver, Janice Dickinson, Minnie Driver, David Blaine, Phil Collins, George Hamilton, Liz Hurley, Ted Kennedy Jr., Doug Lyman, Ron Burkle, Christopher Lambert, and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, aside from these apparent actors and musicians and magicians and journalists and politicians and wealthy individuals and business leaders, there are also a plethora of other names, but you kind of get a sense of some of the more well-known people that he apparently had their contact information. And there are also contacts for properties like various Ritz-Carltons, the Aspen Club, Bel Air Hotel, Beverly Wilshire, Cipriani, the Plaza, the Pierre. I mean, we're talking luxury places here. And the last page of this document is titled Important Email Addresses. Now, I'm not sure if this was actually crafted by a prosecutor in this case or Jeffrey Epstein or somebody connected to him, but it is interesting because one is for Jeffrey Epstein and everything next to it is redacted, but in parentheses it appears there are initials for locations like PB, seemingly for Palm Beach, NY for New York, and so forth. Ghislaine Maxwell is listed there too. There's also one for venture capitalist Joe Pagano, Ehud Barak, former Prime Minister of Israel, Jean-Luc Brunel, talk about him in a second, David Copperfield, and then this one's interesting. Next to Christopher, it seems to say French driver. It says next to this person, important witness. Again, we don't know who wrote that, but important. Now, what is interesting about some of these names, and to kind of give you some more context, is last year when a judge released Jeffrey Epstein materials, more specifically grand jury materials, pursuant to a bill signed by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, these materials centered around when the Palm Beach Police Department opened up an investigation into Jeffrey Epstein back in 2005 and what was presented to a grand jury in 2006. So that was when the parents of a 14-year-old girl came forward accusing Jeffrey Epstein of paying her to give him a massage. The police apparently found out that Epstein had allegedly set up a system to recruit girls to provide him massages, to sometimes engage in sexual activity. The case was brought to the state attorney's office. A grand jury was impaneled where the jurors heard all sorts of testimony from detectives, two of the alleged victims. And that grand jury ended up indicting Epstein in 2006 on felony solicitation of a prostitute. And that was it. You know, there have been long-standing arguments about this. Why didn't prosecutors pursue more aggressive charges? Why was this the only one? And of course, we know what happened, right? The Palm Beach Police Department chief and lead detective, they were partially troubled. They were particularly troubled, I should say, by this prosecution. So they referred the matter to the FBI, who then brought it to the assistant U.S. attorney. So now we're talking about the feds. But in the end, in 2008, Epstein and prosecutors, they worked out a deal where he pled guilty to state charges of solicitation of prostitution and procurement of minors. He was sentenced to just 18 months in prison, only serves 13, and spends most of the time in a work release program. He can leave jail to work at his office and then go back to jail at night, and he avoids federal charges. He had to register as a sex offender too. But this is the whole sweetheart deal that you hear a lot about in this case. And the argument is if he were hit with more severe charges back in the day, he could have been stopped from, as the allegations have explained, continuing to hurt people. Now, I say all that because we learned more information about some of the names I just mentioned in that contact book. For example, magician David Copperfield. So apparently victims who have filed lawsuits against Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, they named David Copperfield as being present at get-togethers at Jeffrey Epstein's residences. And Copperfield also allegedly asked one of the alleged victims if she knew about getting money for bringing Epstein new girls. Very interesting comment that he reportedly made. And he also allegedly performed magic for Epstein's guests. There was a message where the note taker wrote, "Magic David called." There were others with more direct connections to Epstein's supposed worldwide sex trafficking ring. Also, they show up multiple times in Epstein's call logs from that release, but somebody I just mentioned before in his contact book, French model scout Jean-Luc Brunel. He was accused of acting as a pimp for Jeffrey Epstein, procuring young girls for him to sexually assault. In a phone message, Brunel apparently said, "I need a big favor. I hope you will do it." Now, Brunel was kicked out of a modeling agency in 1999 and followed a report of a decades-long abuse against young women and girls. And Epstein and Brunel, they started a new agency. When Epstein died in 2019, by the way, French authorities, they opened up an investigation against Brunel. He tried to flee to Senegal. He was arrested at the airport. He, too, was found dead at a prison in Paris on February 19th, 2022, as he was being investigated for rape and trafficking of minors. But, knowing that, he had messages in that Florida release that, when you look back, it seemed much more sinister. For example, there was a note that read, "He just did a good one, 18 years. She spoke to me and said, 'I love Jeffrey.'" Again, just talking about Brunel because, as I mentioned, he was in the contact book. Also talking about who was in the contact book, Alan Dershowitz. He was the lawyer who helped Epstein secure that sweetheart deal. I mentioned Lex Wexner, the longtime friend and fellow millionaire, the owner of Victoria's Secret. Now, he has been called out in recent years for his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, who apparently gave control of basically a lot of his fortune, a lot of his money. And Wexner has said that he knew nothing of Epstein's alleged indiscretions and says that he himself was taken advantage of by the financier. So, putting that all to the side, moving back on to today's materials release, there's another file that we got to talk about. It is called Evidence Collected. Now, I will assume that this is evidence that was collected from one or more of Epstein's properties. And I say assume, but according to the New York Times, this is a list of the items that were seized by the feds when they searched Epstein's homes in New York and the U.S. Virgin Islands after he was arrested in 2019. And when you think about prosecutors in the Southern District of New York building a sex trafficking case against him for allegedly sexually exploiting and abusing dozens of minor girls in Manhattan, Palm Beach, Florida, and other locations, I mean, look at what they could potentially use at a trial. Look at what they potentially found, okay? CD labeled Girl Pics Nude Book 4. 4 massage tables, 1 red rope containing letter, photo album of girls, photo of islands, heat-sealed bag full of cash labeled SK with 17K plus, heat-sealed bag containing on small white envelope with writing 2000 SK with $4,400, Austrian passport with Epstein photograph, Lots of electronics like computers, iPads, recorders, hard drives. Can easily say dozens of electronics. Binder full of 68 discs. Don't know what's on those. Box containing one stuffed dog. Box containing 2 white and color busts of female torsos. Box containing one brown bust sculpture of female breasts. Bundled photos and CDs from Women Old Photos box. Interesting. 1 red rope containing 2 photos of female buttocks. 5 costumes and 1 wig. 4 fried photos of naked females. 1 set of collar handcuffs and whip. Just basically reading what it says here. So, look, that is kind of a summary of what was released in this potential first batch. We're going to see what happens next. We'll see what Kash Patel may potentially uncover regarding other material that allegedly wasn't handed over to Pam Bondi. And I will say, look, this doesn't help the FBI's role in all of this. I mean, I spoke to Colin Schmidt, and when I did, we talked about this, but my understanding was that during Ghislaine Maxwell's trial, it was revealed that FBI agents, that they raided Epstein's townhouse in New York, and evidence went missing. There were CDs, hard drives, money, jewelry, passports that the agents photographed, and then they didn't have the legal authority to seize it at that point. They ended up coming back to obtain it, and when they did, a few days later, it was apparently all gone. Last year, 8 alleged victims of Jeffrey Epstein sued the FBI over what they claim was a failure on their part to do a proper investigation into Epstein back in the 90s. So it's an important time for the FBI, with essentially the country watching. And you have to imagine there's more information rather than just 200 pages. Look, I'll give you an example. Back in 2019, the FBI seized computers from his home in the Virgin Islands. What is all that digital evidence? So we'll keep an eye out. Look, I will say this in the end. No matter what comes out, I can't definitively say that there's going to be some sort of repercussions for this or criminal charges, aside from the statute of limitations issues that you might run into. You wonder what federal charges could be. Obviously, you think about this with what we've seen in these kinds of cases. Conspiracy, sex trafficking, transporting minors or enticing minors for the purposes of illegal sex acts. These are things you could look out for, but I can't definitively say, based on anything that comes out, that anyone would be criminally charged. But in the interest of transparency and getting more information, definitely useful, definitely interesting.
And first tonight, the new questions we need to be asking about Jeffrey Epstein, because nobody else really is asking these questions. And when you do ask, you don't get answers. When you don't get answers, keep asking. He had effectively a double life, and we know very little about the bigger part of his life. We're not talking about the sex part here. The Wall Street Journal just reported that after Epstein's conviction on sex charges, schedules show meetings planned with William Burns, director of the CIA. Since 2021, he had 3 scheduled meetings with Epstein starting in 2014 when he's Deputy Secretary of State. Why is a Deputy Secretary of State meeting with a guy who had pleaded guilty to sex crimes involving minors? Catherine Rumler, a White House counsel under President Barack Obama, had dozens of meetings with Epstein in the years after her service in the White House. Leon Botstein, the president of Bard College, invited Epstein, who brought a group of young female guests to the campus. Noam Chomsky, professor, author, and political activist, was scheduled to fly with Epstein to have dinner at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2015. We don't know which of these meetings took place. We do know they were scheduled. That's what the Wall Street Journal found. Ariane de Rothschild, who's now chief executive of the Swiss private bank Edmond de Rothschild Group, had more than a dozen meetings with Epstein. Epstein scheduled more than a dozen meetings from 2013 to 2017 with Joshua Cooper Ramo, who at the time served on the board of Starbucks and FedEx. Former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak was reportedly a regular guest at Epstein's meetings. Epstein was scheduled to have dinner with them and movie director Woody Allen and his wife. Why? Sure, there are the accusations of sex with underage girls and the massages and all the sickening sex stuff that surrounded Jeffrey Epstein. That's largely been adjudicated. Nearly 24 of those women shared their stories in court after he died. But we know shockingly little about why the most powerful names in the world, Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Kevin Spacey, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, and so many others, hung out with a relatively small potatoes money manager who appeared to enjoy the company of underage women. We still know very little about why people trusted him to manage their money, or why even after his sexual deviance became public, the rich and powerful felt the need to meet with him. Alan Dershowitz defended Epstein in that 2008 case that resulted in a year jail sentence. Epstein was originally accused of sexually abusing girls as young as 14. pleaded guilty to a much lesser charge. But after that, think about that. After he pled guilty to being involved in some really unsavory activities, the world's most powerful and influential people couldn't get enough of Jeffrey Epstein. Alan Dershowitz joins us now, famed Harvard law professor and criminal defense attorney. It's good to see you, sir. I appreciate it. What is the power that Epstein had that got so many people to check their better judgment at the door?
Well, I think a number of factors. Before he pleaded guilty, which is when I knew him, nobody knew, as far as I know, nobody knew he had this secret life. The president of Harvard, many, many other people. He had seminars with Nobel Prize winners. They were interesting, and he was an interesting guy. Some people, I think, were attracted to him because of his intellect, because of his charm. I think he had some things over some other people. I think he had some extortion over some people. I think some people may have come to him not for his great financial advice. I never thought he was that good financially. I never took financial advice from him. And I suspect there were people over whom he had something involving the sex stuff. Now, the rest of us, we didn't know anything. There were no young women around when I was there as his lawyer. There were no pictures or anything of that kind. But once he was convicted, then a lot of people continued to hang around him. I had nothing to do with him once he was convicted. I knew what he had done once I was his lawyer, and so I had nothing further to do with him. But other people continued to have things to do with him, and that's a real question. I don't think we yet know why, for example, Leslie Wexner allowed him to have counsel rights over all of his money, or other people like that. I think there's a lot yet that has to be known. He did lead completely secret lives. People who knew him early on, like George Mitchell and other people like that, I don't think they knew anything about his secret life. He kept it a complete and total secret. He had a special area of his house that nobody was allowed near. And but once he was convicted, people should have known, and they made judgments. Some people did it for entirely innocent purposes. He met with Fidel Castro. I was once at Caroline Kennedy's house. This is a name-dropping story. Having dinner with Bill Clinton, and he was president, and the Secret Service came over to Clinton, gave him a phone, and he went away for about 20 minutes. And then after the 20 minutes, he came back and handed me the phone and said, "It's Jeffrey Epstein, he wants to say."
Two of the Epstein files dropped from the DOJ tonight. I just went through the flight logs. So there's 7 different documents the DOJ posted, totaling around 118 pages. Right off the bat, whoever wrote these flight logs needs to work on their handwriting because it's extremely difficult to read, and whoever scanned them needs to be fired because they did a terrible job as well. Regardless, let's get into the people of note that I found. There were 2 different flights with President Bill Clinton. He took trips with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. One of the times he went to Morocco and then to Portugal, and then they flew back to New York. This was all in 2002, by the way, which is about a year after he finished up his presidency. Fast forward to 1994, President Trump, who was obviously not president at the time, flew with, I thought it looked like it was potentially with his kids, because I could see the name Tiffany and then it also said nanny. So I can't confirm that, but also looks like the Mark Middleton guy was there. He's the lawyer who also served as the special counsel and assistant to President Bill Clinton in the White House during the 1990s. He actually allegedly killed himself in 2023. And on that trip, they flew from Palm Beach to DCA and from DCA to an airport in New Jersey. Another person of note that seemed to be on quite a few Epstein flights was Naomi Campbell, also Miss Georgia and runner-up for Miss USA. Her name was Erin Nance. She was on plenty of flights, and actually one of the flights that she was on was with Trump as well. Lawrence Summers, he was a former Harvard president. He was on plenty of flights. It also looked like, from my research, he had a close relationship with Epstein. And then there was plenty of names who were redacted. I'm really interested to know who these redacted names were, because if they're putting people like Bill Clinton and Donald Trump on these lists, who is actually getting the chance to have their name redacted? That's what I want to know. Next up, I'm going through Epstein's contact book. The addresses were redacted, but the names are still there. I'm Emma Withrow with the National News Desk, and make sure to give us a follow because I'll be going through the rest of these documents that the DOJ posted later tonight.
Listen, hey!
Tom Hanks recently fled the country after the newest Epstein list dropped, and now that the truth is coming out, it's not very surprising that he left. But you'll never believe just how truly dark and twisted this story is. Picture this: Tom Hanks, America's golden boy, Forrest Gump himself, dancing at a wedding, grinning ear to ear, when suddenly, BAM! A bombshell drops. Jeffrey Epstein's client list hits the headlines, and next thing you know, Tom's waving goodbye to the States, passport in hand, jetting off to Greece like he's fleeing a sinking ship.
The Epstein files have been released. Fox News senior national correspondent Kevin Court has been pouring through all the documents. Kevin, what can you tell us?
Evening, Laura. I don't want to oversell this because I don't think there's a whole lot to sell, at least so far. We'll probably learn a lot more tomorrow morning by that 8 a.m. deadline that the AG has given the FBI in New York to turn over everything in their possession. But let me back up for just a second. The Attorney General, you recall last night, called it breaking news. She promised that we would get the Epstein files today, and while that turned out technically to be true, what we've seen so far, critics have argued tonight, really hasn't lived up to the dramatic billing. Now, we began the day with somewhat high expectation, having seen some influencers with so-called Epstein file folders. But that began to fizzle just a bit because we really didn't get a lot of new information. So once we saw that, we wondered, what about the Attorney General? Was she holding back? Well, she actually wrote a letter, Laura, to the FBI Director, Cass Patel, suggesting that the FBI's New York office, which collected material from the SDNY, that's the Southern District of New York, it seemed to be, for lack of a better description, stonewalling, holding back key materials. Now, the FBI Director, obviously concerned about this, went on X, and Director Patel wrote a fairly lengthy post in it. He said there'll be no cover-ups and no missing documents and no stone left unturned. And anyone from the prior or current Bureau who undermines this will be swiftly pursued. He went on to say if there are gaps, we will find them. If records have been hidden, we will uncover them, and we will bring everything we find to the DOJ to be fully assessed and transparently disseminated to the American people as it should be. So you may be wondering, okay, after all that, Kevin, what do we have? Well, so far we do have 7 flight logs. We have an Epstein contact book. We have a masseuse list, which strangely was redacted. Now, I should add this as well, Laura. Many of the names that we saw on the flight logs, at least so far, mirrored some of the names that we've seen before. There was obviously a criminal action that involved Ghislaine Maxwell. Some of the names on that flight log list, we've already seen those before. But what was interesting so far tonight, and I'm still going through it, we did see a few names in that contact book I told you about. Among them, Michael Bloomberg, Alec Baldwin, and former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair. Again, we're still going through it. As I get more information, I promise to pass it along, but that's what I have so far.
Talking of all you perverts, it was a big year. It was a big year for paedophile movies. Shut up. Spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't kill himself. Just like Jeffrey Epstein. Shut up. I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
当然，我4个月不给你，是要见你的本性。
What's up, guys? It's Benny. President Trump promised that we would all get sick of winning, and I really just can't take it anymore. Please stop. I can't take all the winning. Bill Gates getting dragged, roasted, destroyed, and cooked in front of a live stadium audience by Elon Musk for being a dirty, degenerate Epstein associate. Oh, the clip is incredible. But first, the backstory. Bill Gates was an Epstein associate. Bill Gates credits Jeffrey Epstein with the destruction of his 30-year marriage. Melinda Gates, his wife, they ran the Gates Foundation. He says that it's his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein that led to the destruction of his marriage, mainly because Jeffrey Epstein introduced him to a very young Russian bridge player who Bill Gates then had an affair with. How young? Well, she was 30 years younger than Bill Gates. Seems to be a specialty of Epstein. Is that some of the footage that was recorded in Epstein's Manhattan mansion? You know, Bill Gates and the Russian bridge player, they were in Manhattan a lot. Makes you wonder. Jeffrey Epstein was regularly at Bill Gates' house and vice versa. One time, Bill Gates brought his then wife, Melinda Gates, and she recalled it like this.
I wanted to see who this man was, and I regretted it from the second I stepped in the door. He was abhorrent. He was evil personified. I had nightmares about it afterwards. So, you know, my heart breaks for these young women because that's how I felt. And here I'm an older woman. My God, I feel terrible for those young women. It's awful.
You felt that the moment you walked in? I didn't realize
was awful.
That. Yeah. And you shared that with Bill, and he still continued to spend time with him?
Any of the questions remaining about what Bill's relationship there was, those are for Bill to answer.
Okay.
But I made it very clear how I felt about him.
Mm-hmm.
How clear did you make it, Melinda Gates? Well, you divorced Bill Gates, which I'm a Gates fan. It takes some balls, right? To divorce the richest man on earth. And to do so because of his engagements with one of the more dangerous, prolific pederasts on earth. What does Bill Gates think about this? When Bill Gates is asked about Jeffrey Epstein's death, of course, he smirks and giggles maniacally.
It had
totally
those
normal.
dinners, and there's absolutely nothing new on that.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so you know, in general, you always have to be careful.
Look at the smirking. Notice right here in this frame, you can see that Bill Gates is smiling about the death of Jeffrey Epstein, just ever so convenient to Bill Gates that Epstein died, and now I guess we'll never know. We'll never know. And the government was able to take all of the files and hard drives and cameras and never see some of Bill Gates' happy time with his young Russian bridge player that destroyed his relationship. It's all been reported. That's all true. It's all true. Bill Gates said it was Epstein who was blackmailing him with this. And so now consider the source as Bill Gates complains about deaths. That's right. And not smirking this time. This time it's the deaths that matter, okay? It's the 2 million lives that Doge will kill, saying that because of his work at Doge, cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, that Elon Musk is going to kill millions. This is what Gates has said. Interesting. So Bill Gates is now worried about deaths and he's not smirking and giggling. Got it. Well, I was smirking and giggling when Elon Musk was asked about this, and the room roared. Check it out. A perfect answer.
I do want to ask you about US aid and the comments that Bill Gates made the other day, and I know that you called him...
Yeah, he's a good man.
I know, you've said that already.
That's
I wondered...
also,
and I'm just...
Who does Bill Gates think he is to make comments about the welfare of children, given that he frequented Jeffrey Epstein?
Okay, well, he said he regrets those, and he spent a lot of his own money on philanthropy around the world over the years. My question to you is: have you looked at the data to check if he might be right that the cuts to USAID might cost millions of lives?
Yes. I'd like him to show us any evidence whatsoever that is.
Well done. Well done. Who does Bill Gates think he is to comment about the welfare of children, given that he was very close with Jeffrey Epstein, that he was blackmailed by Jeffrey Epstein for his relationship with a woman who was 30 years younger than him? I wouldn't want that guy to babysit my kids, says Elon Musk. And the roars, man, these people have been they've done it to themselves, right? Pride cometh before destruction. Holy crap, Elon Musk absolutely obliterates Bill Gates. I want him to babysit my kids. Boom! Holy yes, Elon Musk slams Bill Gates. Exposes his close relationship with Epstein. Elon Musk ends Bill Gates, says the Notebooks. Elon Musk then goes on to end the interviewer later on in the interview, saying that interviews with her is like being trapped in an NPC dialogue. It's like talking to a computer. Elon taking absolutely no prisoners. It seems like his time with President Trump has just stiffened his spine. Don't want to know what else was being stiffened with Bill Gates. Maybe I do, meaning maybe you should release the footage. Sure be nice to know. Yeah, just the richest guy on earth, before this guy, right? Just took his crown. He was just stooping a Russian, very young. She was 20 years old, in Epstein's Manhattan mansion, $56 million mansion, getting blackmailed. And nobody's curious about that? Bill Gates never gets asked about that. When he does, he giggles maniacally. Okay. Here's Elon Musk taking the interviewer to task over such stupid questions. Maybe start asking Bill Gates questions like this.
You've talked about $4 billion a day being saved. But that won't get, which is, and I think everyone can agree that combating waste and inefficiency in government is a very good thing. But if you add that up, it's not going to get to 2 trillion over the lifetime of Doge.
I'm sorry.
The 4 billion a day, if Doge is going to run till next July, is not going to get you to $2 trillion. But you still say it's your aim, so we'll take that as read.
There's what Doge. I mean, I feel you're somewhat trapped in the NPC dialogue tree of a traditional journalist. So it's difficult when I'm conversing with someone who's trapped in the dialogue tree of a conventional journalist, because it's like talking to a computer. Doge is an advisory group. We are doing the best we can as an advisory group. The progress made thus far as an advisory group is excellent. I don't think any advisory group has done better in the history of advisory groups of the government. We do not make the laws, nor do we control the judiciary, nor do we control the executive branch. We are simply advisors. In that context, we are doing very well. Beyond that, we cannot take action beyond that, because we are not some sort of imperial dictator of the government. There are 3 branches of the government that are to some degree opposed to that level of cost savings. Nonetheless, let's not criticize whether there's 4 trillion, and instead look at the fact that 160 billion has been saved, and more will be saved too.
Bill Gates gave a really weird interview today where he was asked about his ties to Jeffrey Epstein. I'll let him dig down from here.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful.
What?
I am Mr. Obsidian. Prepare yourself for the Man of Black.